Hello again, it's Cornelius Fischner from pmprepcast.com here. I have some information to communicate to you today about, well, project communications management. In this lesson, we are walking through the 3 essential things to do when thinking about project communications. We will talk about planning your comms, then how to deliver messages, where I have 2 models to share that will help you do that effectively. And finally, before we get to the takeaways, I'll talk about how you can monitor your communications to make sure that they are as effective as possible. You may be wondering, why do we need a whole lesson to communicate? Well, a lot of communications feels like common sense, but how you communicate is one of the biggest critical success factors on a project. There are some key concepts to understand because if you mess up your communications, you will mess up your project. And this here is an important concept to remember. According to project management expert and author Harold Kersner, a project manager spends 90% of their time on communications. In other words, communicating, that is pretty much what we do all day long. And that's not just talking. That includes writing status reports, answering emails, responding to chat messages, meeting with your team, or running into the sponsor in the elevator and then they ask, "So, how's the project going?" All right. We know communication is important, so let's define exactly what that means in the context of a project. Here is Prince2's definition of the communication management approach. It describes communications as how team members will actively engage with and support each other, and how relationships will be developed between different groups within the wider project ecosystem. Good communication is far more than sending a quick email. APM describes communication as the establishment of project stakeholders' communication and information needs. As you see, there is a lot of overlap between stakeholder engagement and communication management. That's not surprising, because communication is the main way of engaging stakeholders. Stakeholders are at the heart of planning project communications because we're communicating to and for them. Keep these questions here in mind as you put together your communications approach. Who are we communicating to? For example, your audience might be split over several countries. What do they need to know? Different stakeholders will need to receive different kinds of information. For example, an executive needs a high-level overview, but a technical team leader needs a lot of detail. When do they need to know? Communication should be timely so people don't forget it. How do they like to receive the information? Some stakeholders respond best to email. Others might like a quick chat message. Or you might make a project newsletter for a different group altogether. And finally, how will you know if the communication has been successful? Think about it this way. What are you trying to do? What do you expect to happen as a result of the communication? All this information here goes into the project communications plan, which is part of your project management plan. The biggest question project managers often have is, what is it exactly that I need to tell people? All your project communications should support the project's objectives. Therefore, communication should help stakeholders understand the project. For example, the requirements, documents, or user guides. It should also help stakeholders work together, like action logs or meeting minutes, and help reduce risk by sharing facts and contributing to decision-making, like status reports. The specifics of what it is that you need to communicate, again, go into your communications plan. You also have to plan how you are going to communicate. There are dozens of ways to do communication, but all of the activities fall into 3 broad categories. First, your audience. Your audience can be internal, like your team or colleagues in other departments, or they are external, for example, suppliers or regulatory bodies. Then there is the degree of formality. At one end of the scale, you have formal communications, town hall meetings where a manager briefs a group of employees is one example of formal communication. Informal communication is at the other end of the scale, for example, small group huddles with your team or emails between the team. And then finally, the communication method. Here you can use written communication like project reports and documents or newsletters about your project that are being shared on the internet. Or you can communicate verbally by speaking, as you do when you meet someone face to face or when you join a video or telephone call. Yes, and how you are going to communicate also goes into your communications plan. And remember the 90% that I mentioned earlier? Well, all of this here is part of those 90% as well. When you consider what and how to communicate, think about how you can include stakeholders at every stage. For example, when you are reviewing the project, seek out stakeholder feedback. Reviews should be regular and serve a purpose. For example, to look at a project stage that has just completed. And to continue that example, after the review, update your stakeholder community with the output, especially if there are changes to the project or the communications approach. Meetings should also include stakeholders, even if those stakeholders work outside the project or even outside the organization. If they are the right people to invite, let them come to the meeting. When you have all the relevant information, you can document that in a communications plan. There are many templates available for this. This particular template here you can see on the screen. That's from Elizabeth Herron again at rebelsguide.pm.com. But your PMO might have documents that you can use. In the plan, write down the stakeholder requirements for communication, the content topics or items that need to be communicated, the frequency of communication for each item, for example, monthly or weekly, and the method to be used, like emails or presentations, and the author, who is the person responsible for writing the communication material, and the approver. You can also include the approval process, any assumptions, constraints, or archiving requirements. With planning complete, it is now time to deliver your plan. Transfer key communication dates to your project schedule so you don't forget that they are coming up, and then carry out your communication activities by writing, approving, and issuing each message in a timely fashion. And here we come back to my elevator example from earlier. Have you ever been asked this question here? How is the project going? Well, this is the question that all stakeholders want to know the answer to. And with a solid communication plan, you can hopefully reduce the amount of times you are interrupted by someone wanting to know that particular answer. When you are asked this question, share status reports or any other communications that they need to help them understand the current performance of the project. Stakeholders love it when you can tell them the project status in a way that they can understand, which is why it's good to include graphs, charts, and images where you can, because they help make the data more useful and relevant. On to the communications model, which describes communications as a process. And we're going to look at two. First, the most basic model, where we begin with a sender who encodes the message, which means turning it into text or otherwise preparing it to be sent. then the message is transmitted. And I'm sure you've experienced a situation where that didn't happen as planned due to technology failure. So things like systems or background noise, they can contribute to making this particular step difficult. The sender, by the way, is responsible for making sure that the message is transmitted correctly. And then finally, the data reaches the recipient and is decoded or translated back into a useful format for them. This model only focuses on making sure that the message is delivered. There is no feedback loop going from the recipient back to the sender to ensure that the message was indeed understood in the way that the sender had intended. The second model was developed by Alistair Cockburn, who talked about the richness or interactivity of a communication channel and how it contributes to making it more effective. And it starts with text on paper, which is the least effective in this model. It's not really a rich method. It's hard to convey warmth or to connect with others from a letter that you receive in the post. Then two-way forms of communication starts with text chat like Slack or Microsoft Teams as the least personal or rich method. A video recording is another one-way method of communication, but here you now have information from body language and tone of voice. Then people talking together on the phone or at the coffee machine is more effective than the methods that we've discussed so far, as there is greater opportunity for interactivity. And you can make communication even richer by putting the people together around the whiteboard where they can truly collaborate effectively in person. So, the richer the communication method, the more information you can convey in a short period of time. There is really no right or wrong method, as some channels will be more appropriate for different types of content. A formal message from your bank is well suited to being on paper. The value of understanding communication models is that they help you identify and address any communication barriers that you encounter during the project. For example, if your team has a number of members whose primary language is not English, you can predict that communication will be a challenge. So what can you do? Well, you ask for and expect constant feedback using the communication model. You ask them to give you their understanding of what you said. If their understanding is incorrect, then you stop the conversation, you repeat the message, and elicit their response until you both agree on the meaning of the message. At first, yeah, this is time-consuming, but in the long run, you actually save time and in the process, build a better working relationship with your team. The models also help us understand that effective communication goes beyond simply clicking send on an email. Active listening is a core skill for ensuring information is passed on correctly. Cultural and personal awareness will help you spot where there might be communication challenges. Tailor communications to stakeholder requirements to reduce the chance of miscommunication and conflict. And what we talked about so far is conscious communication, strategies and plans to communicate well, but you can communicate unconsciously too, through your body language and through your actions. Effective communication needs to be trusted, so make sure you follow any guidelines on confidentiality and security to keep data safe. Delivering the message, as we have learned earlier, is not the end of the process. The final step is monitoring communications to ensure they are effective. You can tell if your communication is working if it's easy to find information. People know what to do and when to do it. Everyone shares a common understanding. Messages are consistent, stakeholders are confident, and you are receiving feedback. Check in with the team regularly to ask for feedback on how you could improve communication across the project. Which takes us seamlessly to this here, because it's important to keep your communications under review as part of the monitoring process, because situations change. You might get a new stakeholder who prefers to receive information in a different way, or your communication might not be working. If you don't monitor responses to your communication, you'll never find out. What you find out might mean you go back to your communications plan and make changes. Iterating your approach helps you to improve the effectiveness of your communication. To summarize what we've talked about, here are 6 general steps that can help you increase your effectiveness. Step 1, identify the purpose of your communication. Your communications management plan identifies the information that needs to be distributed to keep your stakeholders informed of the project's progress. Review the plan regularly to ensure that the information needs have not changed. Step 2, know your audience. Identify who should receive the message. You want to make sure that all communication is created in the format that your stakeholders expect. Step 3, define your communication timings and methods. Usually this means that you will schedule regular communications in a particular format. For example, your stakeholders should expect to receive a status report by email every Friday. In addition, communications can be triggered because a certain event has happened. Here, you can include rules such as, if we are more than 10% ahead or behind of schedule, we will send out a notice. Step 4, prepare the information for distribution. And again, this is important. You want to focus on the recipient. Your writing style, word choice, use of graphics, and so on should be appropriate for their needs and their expectations. Think about who is giving the message. If you are preparing a slide presentation to be cascaded across management, who will then deliver it to their teams, they may need briefing notes or frequently asked questions to go alongside with it. Step 5, communicate the information. At this point, the message will be delivered. If it is a written message, you will use the selected method to transport the information to the recipient. If it is delivered in person, you will use other skills like presentations techniques, facilitation techniques, and meeting management techniques. Finally, step 6, monitor responses. Seek out feedback and check that stakeholders are getting what they need to complete their project activities. But yeah, and that's our 6-step process for you. And this here is kind of the 7th step of our 6-step process, because once the communications are complete, is that the end of their life? No, you have to think about what to do with them now. Some communication will exist in the permanent record, like project reports or articles in your employee newsletters, but should you keep every single email from stakeholders or even store all project-related communication for that matter? The answer to that is found in here, in the Project Communications Management Plan, which should include details of what is archived and what is trashed. You may not want to clutter your corporate knowledge base with every single email related to the project. You may want to limit archiving to what you are required to keep by your company policy and to items which are of value to the organization. Dispose of anything that's not required, taking into account confidentiality and information security policies to do so correctly. It's time to communicate our takeaways, starting with good communication doesn't happen by accident, really. You need to actively plan how you are going to communicate on the project. Then deliver your plan by carrying out the activities, taking into account communication models and effective ways of working. Remember to change the plan if necessary. For example, if new stakeholders join the project. Then seek out feedback to monitor the effectiveness of the communications and improve your process. And lastly, dispose of information appropriately when it is no longer needed. However, I hope you're not just going to delete this lesson here once you have watched it. In any case, we have indeed now reached the end of this lesson here on project communications. Until next time.